Live from a PDAC strip club, I am Gerardo Del Real along with my co-host, Mr. Nick Hodge. This is episode 59 of Bizarro World. Mr. Hodge, how do you like the ambiance here at a PDAC strip club?
Pass the Lysol, Gerardo. I got to spray down the pole.
All jokes aside, coronavirus fears are causing havoc on the markets. No one was spared. Gold, silver, oil, cryptos, the major U.S. indices. Everything is getting hit with the exception of the Treasury market. All jokes aside, let's talk. You canceled your PDAC appearance and trip. I thought it was wise. I privately encouraged you to do so. I believe that my sentiment and my feelings in regards to it are probably echoed by a lot of society and the world right now. So let's talk first where we are as far as the psychology of coronavirus, and then we can talk markets. The Fed came out and said it's willing to act appropriately as the data comes in. We know what that means. They don't care about the economy. They care about the stock market. President Trump and his administration was out putting a half-ass attempt at putting a spin on this thing, which I don't believe Mr. Kudlow did a very good job of. But let's talk one-on-one. What caused you to cancel your trip? What were your fears? I know that PDAC is an event that is important to the industry, but we're getting people now that are advocating for the cancellation of the conference because of the global nature of it. Give me your take, Nick.
Sure. I was scheduled to speak on Sunday as part of the newsletter writers session program, along with a bunch of other people that you would know, like Gwen and Marin and Brent Cook, Jeff Clark, a couple of other people. And, looking forward to that. Obviously, I've never been to PDAC. I've sort of made a joke that I make it a point not to go to PDAC now. But I was invited this year to speak, accepted that invitation. And then, sort of over the past couple of weeks have been monitoring this coronavirus like everyone else, of course, and didn't want to take action until the very last minute. So I knew that I had 24 hours before my flight to cancel, which would have been at like 5 a.m. this morning. I was due to fly out early tomorrow. Of course, we record on Friday, so that would be Saturday. Anyway, I was okay with it when it was not spreading quite as quickly and wasn't in the Western world yet and wasn't going human to human. And then it sort of has now gone outside of China very quickly in the past couple of days. Many countries, 10 or 15 have announced their first case of coronavirus just in the past 24 or 48 hours. The first human-to-human case in the United States came about 48 hours ago in California. And of course, a lot of other conferences have been canceled. There was a big tech conference in Spain that was canceled. Apple canceled their developer summit, and Google it and you'll see a bunch of international business and conference type events are being canceled. And some people, like you just said, are now calling for PDAC itself to be canceled. And so the reason for me was twofold. One, I didn't want to go there and get stuck away from my family. You're seeing a lot of quarantines pop up now. They just said that all Navy fleets in the Pacific are to stay at sea for 14 days. I just saw a plane land, I think it was in Kenya, where they immediately quarantined everyone on the plane. And so heaven forbid there's some sort of breakout in Toronto or at the conference specifically, and I'm quarantined away from my family. The other thing I was thinking about is all these people coming in globally. There's obviously an elevated risk for coronavirus to be present at the conference. And I didn't want to pick that up unknowingly and bring it back to my family and to, Spokane. And so events like this are obviously an opportune environment for contracting and spreading a virus. And so I just thought, giving a 20-minute talk wasn't necessarily worth the risk.
Well articulated. I think that, speaking just as a person that cares about people in general, there's some things that I'm encouraged by, and there's some things that I am not encouraged by. And the one thing I am encouraged by is it seems that finally cases out of China have slowed down. What worries me is that an outbreak in Africa, right? A big, massive continent that doesn't have the kind of infrastructure that, for example, the U.S. has as far as hospitals and, everything that goes along with that. An outbreak there could prove to really, really wreak havoc on a large portion of the vulnerable population there. And so, while I appreciate the concerns that I have for myself, my wife and I just ordered a big second stand-up freezer to make sure that we have fruits and vegetables and Tito's vodka, wine, and all of the things that are important to keep me ticking and moving forward, right? Coffee, just in the event of a quarantine or schools closing or something happening. But, those are very first world problems on our end of it, right? We have, we're fortunate enough to be healthy, to have the resources to prepare ahead of time. We have local hospitals that are nearby that are well equipped. But I think of, the most vulnerable among us, including here in the U.S., that don't have the disposable income. And this is the part that, I worry about. What happens if I'll give you an example. Dell has its global headquarters here in Round Rock, Texas, which is where I live. It's a suburb of Boston. I'm 15 minutes from downtown. And, they employ thousands of people. And there are a lot of people that are living paycheck to paycheck. We've discussed it on this podcast many times. I forget the number, but I believe it's something like 40% of people couldn't deal with an emergency if it was more than $1,000. And I'm making up that number, but it's something along those lines. And so I start to think, what if something broke out here in Austin or Round Rock? There was a quarantine. People were told to stay home. Not everybody could work from home. People don't have sick time. Now they're not getting a paycheck. Now the kids aren't in school. What happens to those people that are on a budget and have prescription medication that they have to buy every month? And then I start thinking, well, even if they have the money, what happens if there is a shortage? Because so much of our medication, so much of our supply chain is dependent on China, right? And this is where I think, this does have the potential to escalate into something a lot more grave than what we're seeing now. Right now, the big impact, with apologies to the families of people that have passed, the almost 3,000 or just over 3,000 people, but it does have a potential to really, really escalate. Bob Moriarty wrote a piece on February 27th that I thought was a bit alarmist, and I hope I'm correct. And, Bob is somebody I respect and I've followed for over a decade. But the title was, and I forwarded it to you, it was "The Greatest Depression Just Began. This is no drill." And I'm going to read an excerpt from it. He said, and he was referencing a piece that he had written on January 27th when this first was addressed by him. And he said, "This has the potential for being the biggest mass casualty event in world history. At the very least, it will take down the financial system as the world economy grinds to a halt with efforts to contain the virus." Now, again, I don't want to sound alarmist, and I don't believe that will be the case. I believe that we will do a better job than having the entire financial system taken down and this being the biggest mass casualty event in world history. But I do appreciate, the fear and that we should all be vigilant. And I'll just leave that there. Any thoughts on any of that? I know I'm rambling a little bit, but this has a lot of angles and a lot to look at, and you have to approach it, from different perspectives. And I think it's important to get some of those out.
The supply chain fear is real, both in drugs and otherwise, that could lead to very systemic and long-lived problems with the global economy, just because so many parts and pieces and things come out of China. I think that the response is going to be very important. So I'm going to sound corny for a second, but I started rereading The Fourth Turning this week, and I couldn't find my copy, and I thought about who has it, and it's you, Gerardo. So I bought a new copy of The Fourth Turning, and then I started reading it again, and the timing has lined up beautifully. They were calling for the unraveling to end around 2005 or 2010, which would kick off a crisis, which would ensue until about 2020 or 2025. So, but what was interesting to me, and I've only started rereading the first couple of pages, is that it talks a lot about the responses to the crisis, right? And so I'm thinking about the response that I've seen thus far from the Trump administration. And it's been, as you said, I think you mentioned Larry Kudlow. He comes out and he says, buy the dip. And
he looked like he had coronavirus.
He might. And I guess what I'm saying before I start to ramble too is that these are very significant challenges, and they're going to expose other things, right? Like you're already seeing companies warned for the entire year. Goldman has already cut its U.S. GDP forecast for 2020 to around 1%. And so these are going to expose other problems that have been sort of simmering under the surface, but have been, things we talk about all the time, papered over by the Fed, and sort of glossed over by the partisan nature of politics and people being allegiant to a party and not really discussing ideas. It's things like coronavirus that are going to, I think, bring those to the fore and show the population really, how qualified or not qualified their current elected leaders are to handle that. And I don't know if I'm being very clear, but in the next couple of years, you're really going to, and events like this are what's going to play into that. There's going to be a crystallization around some really positive ideas. And so, what that book says is that imagine how foggy things are right now. Like, how things are so foggy right now, like there's so many mixed messages and there's so many brands and there's so many different ideas on how to fix things. And we can't fix crime unless we fix family, but we can't fix family unless we fix crime. And nobody's got a firm solution. It says that like, as convoluted and as tangled as that web seems now, is how clear the solutions will become at the fulcrum of the crisis. And so I think we're very fast approaching the fulcrum of the crisis, and ideas are going to get better and people will start to congregate around truly good ideas. Now, I know that's a bit esoteric and philosophical and not very tangible, but I found those words to ring true, at least how I see things.
I agree with that. I think, a simpler analogy, right, would be sometimes you gotta burn the house down to rebuild it, right?
No, that's
tear it down to rebuild. And that's really where I think we are. I think that, as odd as it sounds, I remember in the 80s, Ronald Reagan, there was a statement that was made that, he something along the lines of an external existential threat is the one thing that could unite the country. And this was at a time then, right? It's mild now, but back then this was at a time where there was, deep partisan divide by 1980s standards. And I think of this, coronavirus isn't a national issue. It's not a domestic issue. This is obviously a global thing that we're going to have to work together with friends and maybe not so friendly people and governments and societies alike if we're going to be able to contain this in a way that doesn't lead to Mr. Moriarty's assessment of what this could be or what this is going to be according to him. And I hope that we have the wherewithal to vet ideas and support those ideas regardless of where they come from, right?
Well, if they're good ideas, right. And so, there's sort of like this continuum of individualism and then like, state being a chaperone, right, on the other end. And we're going to revert, like Mr. Dines was writing about this in his last issue. And you can just sort of feel it, right? Like after 2001, we became very state chaperoned, right? And now there's this bounce back against it towards individualism. And that's sort of like the ebb and flow of this whole thing when we talk about the fourth turning. Like that collective psyche is how we respond to things. And we haven't been responding to things well for the past 20 or 30 years. But that overall mood shifts and I guess what I was saying is that coronavirus is going to be an event that accelerates that shift, I think.
I agree. Let's talk markets. What a week. The Dow fell more than 12%. I mean, the Dow basically traded like a junior, right? Yep. Biggest weekly percentage loss since 2008. more than 3,500 points, down 14% from a record high set on February the 12th. The S&P 500 lost 11.5%. The NASDAQ lost 10.5%, 13% below a record high. Gold took it on the chin. I said last week that I expected a correction. I didn't expect one quite this severe. It broke through some very important technical levels in the low 1600s. It closed at 1478. However, perspective in that market is important, and we'll talk about that in just a bit, because it's still, almost 28, 30 bucks higher than the 30-day low. So we'll talk about that in a little bit. But overall, obviously, it was a rush to safety. And again, the cleanest dirty shirt in the laundry basket was the U.S. Treasury market, right? I mean, the 10-year just touched a fresh record low of all time. It was 1.14%. Which is just, that's a heck of a move. I'll put a chart up. I'll put a link up, and it's just unprecedented, right? The volatility index hit a high of nearly 50, 49.48. That was the highest level since February of 2018. So volatility all around everywhere. Let's start with gold. Where does gold go from here, Nick? Do we see a rally next week?
That's crystal ball stuff.
It is. We called the pullback. Well, in fairness to us, we called the pullback last week, and we recorded it, a Friday ago. It published on Monday, and by Monday, that pullback was well underway. So we got the timing right on that. We had no way of knowing it would be this significant, but just the numbers and then the gaps told you that you should have expected a pullback. Where do you think it goes from here?
So the short answer is I honestly don't know. It depends on a couple of things. I see two scenarios. One where this broader market pullback induced by coronavirus fears isn't that long-lived. The Fed steps in and or the fears dissipate and we get back to a broad market trajectory, and gold goes along with that, continues its rise along with the stock market and the dollar. The other scenario is a bit less optimistic for gold investors. And that's the one where we get a repeat of 2008, right? Where gold is thrown out with the bathwater for 2 or 3 years until it really goes on to new highs and takes the equities with it. And today you certainly saw that. You just talked about gold. I was watching some gold juniors that were down 40% today. And so people are indiscriminately selling. So, if the first scenario plays out, I could see us getting back to 1600 plus very quickly. Gold, when Jerome Powell opened his mouth today, climbed almost back to 1600 before closing, 1579. The other scenario doesn't feel good, right? Especially when I was having a conversation with somebody this week, and we will talk about stocks that, we've been involved with for a long time, especially when you've got Midas at 50 cents, right? And announcing a $30-some million financing, and Almaden fell a really precipitous amount today to some 40-some cents Canadian. And so now I'm getting a bit long-winded, but there's the opportunity out there to selectively pick up quality stocks right now, like the two I just mentioned, and even some bigger ones that sold off hard today, like the Sabanyes and the Franco Nevadas and the Wheatons. Gosh, I'm waffling now. I think we get back to 1600 next week. There's the answer.
I like it. I agree with you. I think that I agree with you. I'll keep it simple. I think there's some resistance now at that 1594, 1595 level. If we can break through that next week, then I think, we're well on our way to having a healthy $1,600 gold price. Let's talk about Midas Gold. Let's talk specific stocks. There were a few that interestingly held up well. Some uranium names that have been battered all week long, like Energy Fuels. It was actually absolutely. So, I tweeted earlier that price discovery is always interesting to me. I made a I made a reference to base metals, and they were all up 1 or 2%, and I thought that was interesting in the midst of the sell off. And then, sure enough, right after I put the tweet out, then they fell another 2 or 3%. They were in the negative. But with a lot of the uranium equities, we saw some good price action. Azarga uranium was up 3%. In the gold space, Ethos Gold held its own on some pretty decent volume, up on the U.S. side and flat on the Canadian side. But I thought there was some interesting price movement in the uranium sector, and few select gold names, right? A lot less on that front. But anything on the uranium equities that you'd like to comment on? I know there was a bill that was introduced by a couple of senators that is meant to address the energy dependence in the U.S. There's been a lot of talk, obviously, from the government for months and frankly for years that hasn't quite materialized into concrete recommendations or action steps, most notably and most recently from the Nuclear Fuel Working Group. I'm expecting to hear something there. I believe there was an announcement made that we would hear something next week. Do you think that contributed to the rise in uranium equities?
I think you've just got total and utter capitulation. I posted the talk I gave at Cambridge House about uranium just yesterday or 2 days ago. I posted it, and it was a bearish uranium talking about how I didn't expect utilities to come back into the market until 2023. And then look, the only thing you needed for uranium to go up was for me to sell fission, and that just happened. So now we're ready for the uranium bull market. But seriously, I read Brian London's gold newsletter yesterday, and he sold all of his uranium positions, every single one. And so when you get longtime uranium bull, uranium newsletter writer folks like Nick Hodge and Brian London selling the best uranium assets in the world, well, gosh, hopefully it's the dang bottom.
I hope you're right. Let's talk Midas Gold. I won't say what I said privately, but I made a joke to someone that a week ago, if Midas Gold had announced this financing, I would not have liked it. And, now I think Stephen Quinn, the CEO of Midas Gold, is brilliant for locking that in, right? Can you speak to that financing a bit and your thoughts? We're both shareholders, long-term followers, supporters. We both cover the stock. We've both been to the project, I believe, several times. We both think that Barrick buys it out. I don't mean to put words in your mouth, but correct me if I'm wrong. If not Barrick, someone else. And we both think that this stock is a stock that I think will be a lot higher once its permit is issued here in the next 12 to 18 months. With that being said, Midas announced that it had entered into a funding agreement for gross proceeds of $35 million US. John Paulson did what John Paulson does. He stepped up and took a contrarian position, offering to backstop any part of the financing that BMO and Sprott didn't, and Haywood didn't take up. So I thought that was a heck of a vote of confidence. It's obviously dilutive, but the permitting delays, no fault of Midas, have caused higher cost, as was stated in the release. And the bottom line is you need to be funded to get you across the finish line, right?
Well, that's exactly right. The delays are the reason that Midas needs money, because we're now, I think, cumulatively like 6 months or a year delayed, right, on the decision after all the stuff the U.S. Forest Service has done or not done. Let me talk about the chart first. It doesn't feel good to be a Midas shareholder. I mean, shares are back to the lowest they've been at any point since like mid 2016. It looks on the chart, if they don't hold 48 cents, the thing might go even lower. And so you got to be a buyer of Midas here, which I am. And of course, it gives me confidence to see Paulson, backstop that financing. That's obviously more than enough money to get them to what we think will be the end of their permitting decision, and a positive permitting decision at that. I have to talk about Advantage a little bit, in that Advantage Lithium, in that you don't want, it would be a shame for Midas to get bought out by Barrick at whatever, 75 cents, and you get Barrick shares. I get that you'd be able to participate in the upside of Barrick. But I haven't been in Midas for 5-6 years to come away with a 25% or 50% win, right? You can get those kind of returns elsewhere without tying up loads of capital in a risky junior miner. And so, you hope the stock is able to gain traction as this permitting decision approaches and comes to bear, and as the price of gold continues to be at around 1,600 when we know the sensitivity of the project at those prices. And so timing cuts both ways, but I continue to see the light here and think that this coronavirus stuff and this meltdown in gold that we had this week is going to be a distant memory by the time it's comes time for Barrick and Midas to start talking, right?
Agreed. Another factor that I think is going to influence the gold prices, I think now you could pretty much pencil in a March rate cut, right? I think that, and I said it last year, I thought that the market would force the Fed's hand. I didn't expect it to be this extreme, though I did say that, you were going to see volatility in the gold space, in the precious metal space, where $50 and $100 moves were commonplace. The bad news is you just got one of those to the downside. The good news is I believe this is setting up the next leg up as far as volatility. And I think the next leg up is going to be, I think once we get through March and April and what I anticipate to be maybe a 25 basis point rate cut and possibly even a 50 basis point rate cut, depending on what happens with the data from this coronavirus scare. I think the second half of the year, you're going to see much higher gold prices because I don't see central banks around the world willing to raise rates or even hold them with this much uncertainty. I mean, you look at Japan's economy, you look at the Eurozone, they were in trouble before all of this. China was slowing before all of this. And so I think this opens the door to more money printing because we know central banks are going to look out for not the economy, not savers. They're going to look out for the stock market. That's who they're there to backstop, regardless of what they say. So I think you can expect rate cuts. I think it's going to be a coordinated global effort. And then I think you can anticipate infrastructure spending that's been, I've been calling for this for years, and it just hasn't happened. A part of why it hasn't happened is because of the partisan divide, at least in this country and increasingly around the world. I think, again, this coronavirus has the potential to bring governments together and say, we need to do something to ramp things back up. And I think you can expect stimulus on an infrastructure package globally. I think you can expect multiple packages globally. So all of those things lead me to believe the Fed's going to print more money. The government around the world, call it one government, the US, Eurozone, Japan, whoever, they're going to print more money. And I think all that bodes well for gold. And I think as low as that 10-year is at 1.12, the 10-year German equivalent is at negative 0.60%. So if you're wondering how much lower it can go, it's got a lot of room to go lower. I'll leave that there, but yeah, that's my take on that.
It's almost as if, if we respond to the crisis positively and implement programs that could really improve the infrastructure and create good paying jobs and get back to things that truly help community and country and not just the richest stock owningest among us, that we could maybe evolve from this fourth turning in a positive light. That's sort of what I was saying earlier, but that's the example I meant. That's what I was saying.
No. And I think you said it well. And I think everybody would be well served to order that book or reach out to Nick Hodge. And like he was generous enough to give me his copy. Maybe he'll send you a copy or two. But it's a great read. I think it's timely. I think we're there. We've been sounding the alarm on that book and its message, I believe, since the inception of this podcast. And I think you're spot on, Nick, that we are entering the period where these concepts and these ideas are followed up with action and very tangible, coordinated results that come out of those themes and those concepts. A good thing, but not without volatility. That is what it is, everybody.
Exactly right.
Base metals. Is there an opportunity in the base metal stocks, Nick? Or should we be focusing right now on the battered precious metal stocks? And I'm going to talk about Almaden in just a second, because I think that Almaden has been a perfect case study, and everything that can go wrong at the exact wrong time And I think that's about to turn around, and we'll talk about why that is. And we've talked about it in the past, but I'm going to refresh that for everybody that may be new to the podcast or isn't familiar with the Almaden story. But opportunity in the base metal stocks, anything there?
I think you wait. I gave you my 2-part answer earlier about, I think you wait to see if there's a more protracted, extended effect on the global economy from this virus. Then, of course, the base metals are not going to do well as the primary inputs for all the things that the world needs when it's consuming and growing, right? So I think you wait. There is opportunities, of course. I mean, Rio Tinto sold off like $10 in the past 2 days. Like, you could buy Rio Tinto and lock in that yield if you want. But as far as like speculating on copper and nickel, I think you're best served to wait in the short term and focus on the precious metals. My opinion, of course.
Agreed. Let me give you my opinion on precious metals and an opportunity that I think has been an opportunity since, the 75-cent level. And here it is at 49 cents Canadian, right? With a market cap of 54 million and a mill that's worth US, replacement value in mint condition, which it is. I think give or take a few million, $75 million. So Almaden Minerals has been just absolutely hammered. 52-week high of 110, 52-week low hit today of 38 cents. It closed up at 49 cents. It actually recovered pretty well. But, 3 months ago, we were anticipating that we would soon have an announcement sometime in November that it's what I consider to be, a world-class polymetallic silver gold deposit in Mexico, that it would be permitted and that it would be fending off potential suitors that have been circling the project for years in a bid to get a higher bid, obviously. And what's happened since then is everything that could go wrong has gone wrong. There is a fringe, and I'm not going to name it because they don't deserve the attention, but there is a fringe NGO with a large backer out of New York that makes a habit out of going into not just Mexico, but Colombia and several other Latin American countries, amongst others, and filing what I consider to believe, and this is my personal opinion, fringe lawsuits in hopes of getting a check. Let me call it what it is. It's legal extortion is what I call it. And so if you play ball and cut the check, they won't write up, a litany of false accusations, and they won't support and in some cases fund fringe protest, false protest from people not related to the project. And the Almaden case is an absolute perfect example of what this group goes around the world doing. So there was an Almaden news release on February the 27th, yesterday, as of the time of this recording, where it had to clarify to the British Columbia Securities Commission its mineral claims to the Ixtaca project. The reason it had to clarify that is because Almaden, once upon a time in 2009, 2010, when it made its initial discovery, had a large claim block that surrounded this brand new discovery that was exciting. The stock went from 50 cents to $5. It now has 4.5 million gold equivalent ounces. Again, I said it's polymetallic. It's 50% silver, 50% gold. As the project was developed, as it was drilled out, it was clear that you could build a mine and drill out this one deposit without having to retain the entire land package. So Almaden dropped the land that surrounded a lot of the project. It wasn't necessary. They wanted to do right by its shareholders, so they decided they were going to go ahead and save the company and shareholders' money by not carrying cost on ground that it didn't feel it needed. So this group comes in and starts writing a bunch of hit pieces about Almaden and how bad its community relations is, and how the project doesn't have, any chance of getting permitted. And I go and I visit the project and I speak to people on the ground, and I see overwhelming support in the immediate community that Almaden operates in. That's followed by a protest far away from the project that was instigated by this group. They took some pictures, they put them on Twitter, they did a report on it, and they start emailing Almaden shareholders, fund managers, anybody who will listen. And they say, look at all these protests. Nobody wants this project. And the reason they did that is because they didn't get their check. Let me be clear about that. They didn't get paid because Almaden does what all good junior resource companies that get their arm twisted to go away to make these groups go away should do. Tell them to fuck off is what they did. That's my words, not theirs, and that's my speculation, not Almaden's speculation. Not what they did. That's what I speculate they did. So this group says, okay, you have this big land package. You dropped X amount of hectares. Well, that's not convenient for us because we're going to file a lawsuit challenging the constitutionality of all the mineral claims in Mexico, which is what the lawsuit is doing. It's challenging the Mexican Constitution on mining, right? And this is being defended not just by Almaden, it's being defended by the president, by the Senate. I could go on and on and on. And so Almaden says, we don't even own the land that you're contesting. We no longer have rights to the land. And so they file a lawsuit and they basically said, you have to take that land back because to make our lawsuit work or it doesn't work. So bottom line is this, that case is in the higher courts as of right now. Almaden is defending the fact that they're current on their taxes on the concessions that hold the Ixtaca project. They're contending, rightfully so, that the original concessions aren't relevant anymore because they dropped those a long time ago. But the problem for this group out of New York is if the concessions that Almaden dropped a long time ago are no longer relevant, and they haven't been for years, then the lawsuit is not relevant. And so that's where we're at with this. They're saying you have to take back the land that you gave up because if not, our lawsuit doesn't work. And I am going on the record here and I'm telling everybody that'll listen that I believe I don't know if it happens in 2 weeks or 2 months, but I believe that that lawsuit is going to get laughed out of court. I don't believe that this group is going to rewrite the Mexican Constitution and how it approaches mining in Mexico. And I think Almaden is a heck of an opportunity. It has been since the 70-cent level. It was at the 50-cent level. And, you know, here we are, US 39 cents or 37 cents or wherever it's at, 49 cents Canadian. If you don't have a position and you can afford to speculate with some capital, I would encourage everybody to do so. If you do have a position, do what I have been doing and what I'm doing more of next week. I'm adding to my position. So that's a lot of ranting, but I think this type of activity from these types of groups merits it. And I don't know how clear I was about what's going on there, but it's an attempt to extort a company that's doing everything right in a community that wants the opportunity for upward mobility. And this is why it pisses me off so much. Wants the jobs, wants the mine to be built. And you have these outside groups that have nothing to do with the community, no consequence as to what happens, looking for a check and stifling the upward mobility of the immediate community that could benefit from the jobs that building this mine could provide.
I think it was crystal clear, especially if you've been following the Almaden saga and you have more insights than I do, although I'm an Almaden shareholder as well, and I continue to view it as frivolous and have the same opinion that it will be reviewed or resolved positively, with Almaden getting their permit. So glad to take the time to talk about it a bit.
And this is Almaden's formal quote in the news release. Almaden's two appeals to this change in mineral tenure are based on Mexican legal advice that it cannot be forced to own mineral rights it has formally dropped. I want to be clear, this NGO wants Almaden to assume ownership on mineral rights it already dropped in order for its lawsuit to work. It's fuckery at its finest. So we'll see how it turns out. That's my rant on that.
Hopefully it's 2 weeks and not 2 months.
I hope so. It's been a painful 3 months for myself, for subscribers, for shareholders, for everybody involved. But, if it's a slingshot move and it coincides with gold holding at the 1600 level, I think it'll be a heck of a speculation at these levels and frankly at the 70-cent level.
Agreed.
All right. What else you got, Mr. Hodge? Do you have anything insightful or happy? Or I don't want to prolong this. We already, spent a good deal talking about Almaden and Midas and obviously the impact of this coronavirus to the markets and to people in general. We talked about the bond market. I don't want this to turn into just one of those things where it's drawn out and we just say words to say words. Do you have anything nice that'll make me feel happy?
Well, the Fraser rankings came out this week, and if you want to feel happier about Midas and Revival, Idaho was firmly in the top 10 when it came to investment, quote unquote, investment attractiveness, and there was no. Well, Canada was not the top mining jurisdiction for the first time ever, but Idaho was moving up, as you and I well know it would and should. So. That was a positive story for me.
Let's hope Revival shares and Midas shares rebound. We've been, I think both you and I have talked about, the jurisdiction and how favorable it was. And frankly, I think we were ahead of that. I think we talked about it years and years ago, again, visiting the project, visiting Stibnite and visiting Bear Track and Arnett in person and talking to the locals and vetting what the support looked like there. And so I'm glad to see the rest of the industry finally acknowledging the bipartisan support that Idaho offers mining companies that do things responsibly. And, I think anybody in Idaho will tell you that Midas led that charge, and kudos to Stephen Quinn and his team for doing so in such a responsible manner. I think it's really opened the door to the next great mining boom out of Idaho.
Number one spot, Finland, and we're no stranger to Finland either. So I felt like I sort of had my finger on the pulse when I saw those rankings come out.
Good job. Good work. Did you see the New York Times article about the farm that harvests metal from plants?
I didn't. I want to know about it.
So there are several, I guess, hyper accumulating plants is how the New York Times phrased it, that thrive in metallic soil. This could be a great promo for your marketing brain, Nick. I'll send you the link.
It.
I'll put the link up. That kills other vegetation, right? So this metallic soil kills other vegetation. But it's now being tested for the potential of what they call phytomining. I have no experience with this. I am not an expert in this. I have no clue what it is. I had the article forwarded to me by my brother-in-law earlier in the week, and I found it fascinating. So according to this article, some of the Earth's plants fall in love with metal. The roots act like magnets. And these organisms, there's about 700 that are known, thrive in metal-rich soils that make hundreds of thousands of other plants species either die or just dry out, right? So if you open one of these trees, if you slice it open, you can see a sap that oozes like a neon blue-green juice. And it's like 1/4 nickel, which is far more concentrating than the ore that feeds the world's nickel smelters. So that is absolutely fascinating to me. It hoards these metals at ridiculous levels. And so I know what's going to happen with this. Kind of like when people started talking about mining asteroids and, there's enough gold. And I guarantee you somebody's going to write a promo on this. I'm going to forward this to you, Nick, and we'll put a link up for everybody to read it because the article does justice to it a lot better than I could. But it goes into the details. It has some amazing pictures of what this looks like. And it's pretty fascinating stuff. So I thought that was neat. I thought that was an interesting story to kind of get away from all the madness that has been the markets this week. And I'm happy to share it. We'll put that out there.
I just take issue with their naming because a very big missed opportunity. Phytomining is cool, but leaf leaching sounds a whole lot better.
I knew you'd have something. I'll send you the link. We'll share the link with everybody. I will say that the article mentions that the greatest potential is in Indonesia and the Philippines, two of the world's biggest nickel ore producers. And so, we
can plant them. We can plant them alongside the solar roads.
Can't make this stuff up. The other thing I can't make up is I see that the former mayor of Baltimore, your old stomping grounds, got 3 years in prison. Did you see that? I'm sure you did.
What was that? Which one? Which sentence? There's been so many of them.
Miss Catherine View. Yeah.
Not Sheila Dixon. Got it.
No. She's next, I think.
No, of course I saw it, and it's just funny because, Baltimore is the city that reads. That's the tagline, and she got caught peddling children's books. So there's a good chuckle in there, right? Sad for them.
Edgar Allan Poe would not be proud.
Yeah, no, quote the Raven. Baltimore's struggling, man. It's sad to see. I obviously have a lot of friends there, family there, lived there for 30 some years of my life. And this is just indicative of the problems the city is facing and how they can't get out of their own way to solve them, whether that's hiring police chiefs that can't get it done and continue to oversee the mismanagement and in some cases the outright criminal behavior of their police officers, all the way up to the mayor who, as I just said, she's not the first mayor that had to resign in disgrace. 2 mayors ago, Sheila Dixon was taking fur coats and gift cards from developers in exchange for, favorable decisions as far as, land access and development. And so it's sad to see in a city that has, the highest crime per capita, violent crime, at least of any city in the country. And, hopefully along with, it's certainly seen, some of the worst problems that this country has seen, right? They're concentrated in towns like Baltimore and other formal industrial centers that were hit hard when the tech wave came and didn't keep up. I hope that made sense. But anyway, yes, I saw it, and it's sad that the city of Baltimore and the people of Baltimore can't elect good leaders. And the field. Sorry, it's anyway. The people that are running for mayor now, it's something like well over half of them have like a criminal record, and not that that's prohibitive from them being a good person or from them being running for office, but again, indicative of sort of the situation that Baltimore is facing.
Agreed. And I bring this up, and I'm going to provide some context for those not familiar with this case and explain exactly what happened. But I bring this up because I think it's indicative of what we're doing with almost everything in this country right now, which is really just, selling out, whether it's kids at the border or people with mental health issues or our veterans that come back with PTSD or people that are addicted to legal or illegal substances, you name it. What we're doing is capitalizing on people's pain and monetizing it and doing so in a way that does everything but help the people that the quote unquote treatment or cure or funding is supposed to help. In this case, while she was a Maryland state senator, she wrote a book called Healthy Holly. Exercising is fun, right? And so what she did is she sold the books to corporate buyers who wanted to obtain or maintain a government contract. Let me repeat that. She was a state senator. She said, hey, let me write a book teaching kids that exercising is fun. Noble enough, right? Everybody can use that. Exercising is fun. It's also good for you. Hence the name Healthy Holly. The whole purpose of doing this was to drum up fake sales. Oftentimes they never delivered the books, and many times they sold the same quote unquote order of books multiple times. Mm-hmm. And they used the proceeds to her mayoral campaign and to buy a new house is what she did. 2 other aides that are awaiting sentencing also participated. But again, this is business in America. She just got caught. And I can't, for people that are listening outside of the country, it's a sad state of affairs. The corporate fraud that goes on at a very, very high level of every institution in our country. And that includes police departments, mayor's offices, state offices. I could go on and on, but I thought this was a good metaphor for what goes on with so much in our country, right? Make a buck off people's pain, make a buck off of something that makes people feel good, make a buck off of something that really actually could have been a good thing, and use it for your own benefit. Because at the end of the day, all that matters is making a buck.
Yep, for the individual, right? Not the collective society, right? Fourth turning stuff.
You got it. What are you watching next week other than everything, Nick?
Oh my goodness. Next week is going to be very interesting. So, I assume there's going to be some more news releases from mining companies that thought they were going to capitalize on the higher gold price and the sentiment at PDAC. So, Um, there'll be some new news releases to digest. We didn't talk about crypto at all, and maybe that's um, why Bitcoin prices has fallen. Nobody's talking about Bitcoin, which hasn't really acted as a safe haven. You could probably make the same argument that maybe it comes ripping back like gold, but certainly hasn't acted like I would have expected it to. I'm watching key levels in the S&P. We're in correction territory right now, but we're very close to bear market territory. And so I'm interested to see if we hit those levels. It's like 2,700 on the S&P, I believe.
Agreed. I'm interested to see what happens with silver. I think that's an interesting story. I've said,
I think some today.
Yeah, down 6% today. And I know you had a story to share about the local coin shop and silver, and I'll let you share that here in just a second because I thought it was timely. But I've said before that I thought since gold broke through that 1464 level, I thought gold was ready to go and it was time. And it doesn't mean we're not going to have pullbacks. We are, but I think it's in a bull market that's sustainable. I haven't been convinced of silver, and I'm still not convinced, and not just because it was down over 6% today, but I feel that it's trading as an industrial metal. And if you believe that, the copper space with its, great mid to long-term fundamentals is due to have a good second half, but is probably going to suffer for the remaining of at least the first half. I gotta bundle silver in that package there because it's trading like an industrial metal. It doesn't go up when the precious metals go up for the most part. It doesn't outperform to the upside the way that it has traditionally, but it definitely outperforms to the downside in days like today. And so I'm interested to see where that continues. I wouldn't be surprised to see it back in the $14 or $15 level here soon.
I was talking to you just last week about the gold to silver ratio and how it was near a point. It's only been at, I think, like 3 other times in history. I had written about it a couple of weeks ago in the February issue of Underground Profits. I recommended buying Mag Silver. That worked out really, really well until a couple of days ago. And so, I'm interested in silver. I feel like it's nearly silver's time today. That gold to silver ratio went to the highest level it's been since 1991. That's the amount of silver, of course, it takes to buy 1 ounce of gold. I called my local coin dealer. I said, hey, you got any silver eagles down there? He said, no. Some guy came in and bought them all yesterday. So anecdotal, of course, but people are making the same calls that I'm making, right? And acting on it. And so he's just around the corner. So I walked down there and I said, you got any rounds or bars? And he said, I got a couple left, but they've been going. So I bought the rest of the coins. I bought the rest of the rounds and bars he had today. So, and people want to buy silver, I think.
100 to 1. That's the ratio at which I might be convinced they're going to start moving together. And we're close.
It's not far away, yeah.
It's not. Silver closed at 1663. Gold's at 1585. So we're there. Either you believe that gold's going to pop back up, or you believe that So I mean, either silver comes down or gold goes back up, right? If that's going to happen, and so we'll see. I'm curious. I'm interested to see what the price action is next week, as is with everything. Getting a statement from the Fed now saying that they are prepared to act in the best interest of the economy, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, like I said, all what they want to do. Breaking news, everybody. The Fed's going to backstop the stock market with liquidity. The exact same thing that probably got us in this jam that we're in right now, right?
Somebody today said it's a taxine instead of a vaccine.
We're also getting breaking news that the Trump administration is considering, to your point, tax cuts. Basically, let's throw the kitchen sink at it. It's an election year. I need to get reelected. I've put my ass out on the line by telling everybody how wealthy I made them. And I've attached my ball and chain to the stock market. And so it's going to have to live with that one. Let me ask you a question before I let you go. Do you think that the Democrats allow Bernie to get the nomination? And then do you think that the Trumpster may be in some trouble if this continues?
I think
two questions, obviously. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the Democrats are willing to blow up their party to prevent Bernie Sanders from getting the nomination. They are positioning
Yep.
themselves for it. They asked the question in the Nevada debate. We talked about this. Should the person with the most delegates get the nomination, or should we have a contested convention? Every single person on the stage said contested convention, except for Bernie, and you can just see it in the positioning of Democrat higher ups. They're going to try to steal this thing from him. Does the second part was, does that affect Trump? Barring something crazy with this virus in the market, not that the past couple of days haven't been crazy, but I'm looking at betting markets, right? Not polls. And he's still at 58%. His odds were up to date. Trump, I'm talking about winning the presidency. And so I think you still get a Trump in there. I'm not sure who would beat him because, Bernie's the front runner, right? And so you steal the nomination from him. I don't think you get Democrats coalesce around a candidate, let alone the entire country, right?
Agreed. I think we get a second Trump term, and then it's going to be an interesting 4 more years if he makes it that far, right? I don't recall.
That brings us to 2020. That brings us to 2024. And as I started this podcast at 2025 with the fourth turning. And so you're going to get, I'm telling you, I've been saying it, there's going to be something new, somebody new, some new party, something that you can't fathom right now will happen by 2024.
I agree. And I hate to be morbid, and I hate to end the podcast on this note. And I have my disagreements policy wise, just like I have some things that I agree with President Trump on, but I have a lot of disagreements social policy wise with his administration. And I don't wish this on him, but I remember I had the pleasure of interviewing Mr. James Dines a couple of years ago. And I asked him, and I knew the answer. It was a rhetorical question, right? But I asked him, when was the last time that a president took on, all facets of the intelligence in the country, right? The CIA, the FBI, and did so in such a loud manner. And, of course, that answer was President Kennedy, right? And so while I don't wish that on Mr. Trump, I would not be surprised because of the nature and violence that sometimes happens with these fourth turnings. If something like that were to materialize from, who knows from where, but it's not something that hasn't happened in this country. Obviously, it's something that's happened actually fairly recently and kind of lines up with, the last time that we had a significant turning, right? The volatility of the 60s. And that was a lot. That was a lot. So something to keep an eye on. Again, don't wish that on anybody, but these things don't happen peacefully. And so expect more volatility, folks. Get ready for it.
You're not far off the mark, Gerardo. According to the book, the first turning, we're in the fourth turning now. The first turning, which is a high, ended with the assassination of President Kennedy in 1963.
Correct. So again, not wishing that on Mr. Trump at all, but just things to look out for, guys. I do believe that these turnings produce that type of behavior and these types of catalysts, and so just something to keep an eye on, everybody. Anyhow, Mr. Hodge, anything else on your mind?
Well, I'm going to go on about the fourth turning. Sorry, Gerardo, just for 30 seconds.
No, it's important. It's important. I'm glad you're doing so. It's important.
That assassination was the end of a 20-year cycle, right? So you get four 20 to 25-year cycles. And so think about when Kennedy was assassinated. That was like the end, as I just said, of our high, but like we were triumphant after beating Hitler and after coming out of the depression in the 30s and 40s. And that high carried us for 20 some years until 1963. And that high ended with the assassination of JFK. And the thing that was ushered in next was completely disjointed from that time of prosperity and civic unity that came before it. You had the counterculture of the 60s came immediately, and after that, completely juxtaposed to what you saw with the Leave It to Beaver 50s, right? And so that's the sort of cataclysmic change we're talking about. Anyway. That's all I got.
No. Let's expound a little further, and to further your point, there were also a lot of important changes that came with that, right? A lot of things that were positive, that came as a result of that turning. You know, we had the Civil Rights Act, we had
integration
on
of
that
schools,
front. Absolutely. And none of those things came without violence and volatility, everybody. So, you know, I mentioned earlier that I thought Mr. Moriarty's article was a bit alarmist. Better to sound the alarm and it not be a fire, than to think that there could be a fire and not sound the alarm.
Agree.
That's all we got, everybody. You've been warned. Gerardo Del Real along with Mr. Nick Hodge. This has been episode 59 of Bizarro World. Be safe out there, everyone. Stock up on your Tito's and your wine and your fruits and your veggies and your meats if you eat meat, and be kind to each other. I think we're going into a period, I think Mr. Hodge is right, where that's it's going to be critical. It's going to be increasingly important. Be neighborly, and interesting times ahead. Mr. Hodge, send us away.
Adios.
En español. Muy bien hecho, señor Hodge. That's all, folks. Have a good one.